Well, we're going to pivot a little bit. I want to thank folks at Huawei for inviting me here. A month ago, I didn't know how to pronounce the name. So, as Andy said, I haven't worked with Huawei directly or indirectly. But I've worked with a lot of companies and organizations worldwide over my career. And Andy did have to bring up the days of Microsoft having to pivot and rethink how we approach security. But I think that's an important part of the theme that I want to talk about, is learning from lessons. And there's no perfect security, but how we need to continually relook at not only our own products, but all the code libraries we use, as well as everything within the ecosystem. So I'm going to touch base a little bit. So I now, I'm no longer with the Online Trust Alliance. I'm chairman emeritus of that. I have my own consultancy group. But what I want to talk about is really kind of the theme of the program here today, or the last 2 days, and really some of the challenges and opportunities that I think we all are facing. And I say the challenges on the good side, and it's all positive. So we look at the billions of devices coming out, and whether it's 30 billion or 40 billion, it doesn't matter. But more and more connected devices that are going to be using your networks. And that's really exciting. Some of them I question the value of, some of the connected toothbrushes that are not quite there yet. But there's a tremendous amount on smart cities and things we're seeing here. But all these devices rely on some type of cloud service. So as we're, again, thinking about the security in the ecosystem, it's not just the device, but what about the data, what about the cloud that it's working on? And then the apps. We all are controlling them with some type of app on our phone, so we have to think about the security of that app as well. And last but not least, AI. And I think it's not really last, but as we think about that's in the news every day, and the powerful capabilities we have with AI, and also some of the ethics. And that's what actually I've spent a lot of time of looking at the ethical AI principles, and a lot of companies are trying to wrestle with that issue. And last but not least is 5G. And so we think about how 5G is going to accelerate that and open up millions, if not billions, of new devices, and all the data that's flowing between them. So as I look at this, it's not just a security standpoint, but I also look about the privacy aspect of things. Do we understand all the different data elements that are being collected, and how they may appear benign by themselves, one pixel here and one pixel together, but when you leverage the power of AI and pull all that together, there's a real big challenge from a privacy perspective, and that's just one thing to think about. It's not just security of your devices. So lots of growth. By any stretch of the imagination, we're going to see more and more sensors and growth. I've also been a utility commissioner in my city, and I'm involved now in the city of Bellevue on the whole smart city rollout of devices. And so lots of exciting opportunities that we have here. I think it's interesting to look at, you can get these slides later, but just all the solutions that are out there, but we haven't even thought about what's going to happen. And we think about how 4G, and we've all heard of how that made Uber and Lyft possible. We don't really know about the possibilities where we're going to be in a few years from now, how 5G is going to enable us. But it's only going to be successful if the entire ecosystem is safe and secure and trustworthy. And that's an important part of my focus. The other area that I'm very focused on, and I'm doing work with the Consumer Product Safety Commission, is what I call hazardization. So the threats aren't just I'm getting data from a device or shutting down a device. It's the physical life safety damages and harms that can occur. So we're no longer looking at just data files getting corrupted or malware or ransomware. We're talking about real issues. And so one use case, in fact, we actually modeled is some of the smart fire alarms, able to push down a patch to those that disabled the fire alarm, but it still showed, the light showed it was working. So there's a good example of an ecosystem challenge of how a device can be corrupted. And then obviously if you have a real fire, the device doesn't work. So those are some of the other things that we think about. And again, as you think about devices and services, is what happens when it loses connectivity? What happens when a patch is a bad patch? And so yeah, we have to reboot our computer. We can live with that. But we're now talking about real human life issues as we look at the broader aspect of how IoT and 5G really gets woven into our everyday lives. So, again, I'm really blowing through this stuff quickly because I really want to have some exchange and discussion here. Probably everyone recognizes that from Spider-Man. With great power brings great responsibility, and I think that's really something we all have to think about. We all have a role in here, and whether it's using equipment from Huawei or using Microsoft software or devices from Google or Amazon. As we think about that, all these devices, we have to be thinking about the entire ecosystem and how everything is working together and what we can do to mitigate the risk. Because there's going to be risk no matter what we do. There's going to be vulnerabilities, whatever we want to do. But we need to put in place practices and principles to help prevent them, but equally as important, how to remediate them. And one of the things that I've worked on is, you're not going to see this, it's available, it's what I've created as an IoT safety architecture. So one of the challenges that I've come across as I work with device manufacturers, they say, well, what best practices should I work towards? What standards? And really a lot of that comes down to the industry that the products are in and what the company's risk appetite is. But what we've tried to do is provide an architecture of principles and then a scoring mechanism so you as a company can help evaluate that. And this is just one example. But I think you need to look at some type of principles and scoring mechanisms of everything in your supply chain, whether it's your vendors' products or your own services. Where are their vulnerabilities and what can you do to mitigate them? So again, some important stuff in here. Again, ethical data privacy practices. I know it's kind of out of scope of the program and the conference, but again, think about your data and the data mining. Everyone looks at it, they see data and they see money and dollar signs, but think about what is the right thing to be doing with that data today. And a lot of companies are challenging with it. Amazon last week announced an ethics board for AI, only to find that they got employee blowback. They kind of screwed up a little bit on. Now they have to disband their ethics board. So they have some challenges, but you have to really take a step back and think, well, what are you trying to do? And the other two things is multi-stakeholder efforts. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to fly to DC tonight. I'm supposed to participate in an NTIA program with the Department of Commerce on what's called software bill of materials. And so one of the big things as we look in IoT is how secure is all of your code that you're using within your products. And so we're developing best practices. And so it's a great process of bringing different stakeholders together that really can look at these issues and help other companies learn from that. So that's just one example there. And again, more information is posted on the site there. The last thing, for time here, there's lots of materials here, but some of the best practices out there, if you're thinking of IoT, there's also a published document on patching and securing a product over its life cycle. And that's something else we have to really think about. It's not just shipping a product and buying a product. How do we maintain its safety and security over its life? What point do we actually pull it because it's insecure, because it can't be patched any further? So that's a big area. Software disclosure mechanisms. So again, some really good products from NTIA. And then NIST, I was with NIST last week or 3 weeks ago in San Francisco at RSA. So NIST is working on some baseline security requirements for IoT. So there's a lot of work, but all this comes back to multi-stakeholders working together to help develop and maintain a more safe and secure and transparent and trustworthy ecosystem. So with that, I want to just kind of wrap it here. I know we're really running late. So we have about 10 minutes of Q&A for combined. So again, thank you for providing the opportunity, Tom, and everyone else here.
Okay, just a couple of things, and we'll get into the Q&A, but one of the most elementary ideas, I've been here for 16 years with Huawei, and we wouldn't even really be having this discussion without, ever since we've been here, we have a very solid group of dedicated customers. And the reason our customers are dedicated, and some of them do testimony and some of them go to the government. And obviously that's to encourage your own business, but it's also because we are very customer centric. And I believe strongly in what we say we're going to do, we're going to do. And had we not brought a positive difference to the U.S. in all these years, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have a customer base. But let's turn it over to questions. We have customers here, so I don't know if you have any comments, but please don't be afraid, because I think today you've heard a lot to think about. And let's hear what you're thinking regarding that. And you can direct questions to anybody. So please, who has a question?
Hey, Tom, we've heard that the UK's done some testing, monitoring and stuff. I think France, I remember hearing in the past that France is. And now we're hearing about Germany and what they're anticipating to do. Has that never gained any traction in the U.S.? I mean, has there never been any kind of a willingness on the U.S. part to engage with you guys on doing some of that kind of thing that other countries are doing?
Yeah, I'll turn it over to Andy, but bottom line is we are a bunch of great guys. However, the government doesn't seem to call me up and say, come on in, let's chat about solutions. But where the traction comes from really is you all. I mean, whether it's the FCC or any department or your senators or congressmen, you guys are the ones that get traction, you bring through an idea. But Andy, why don't we talk about this?
Yeah, the concept of risk mitigation is central to the CFIUS process, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., and that's the jurisdiction under which the national security agreements are in place for Ericsson and Nokia. We know, although we haven't seen the actual terms of it, we know there's very extensive evaluation of the Nokia products that are going to be sold in the United States. We assume the same is in place for Ericsson, but we really don't know that. So, yeah, no, the U.S. government has quite a bit of experience overseeing product testing, which is probably why the DNA principal deputy said we can take care of backdoors by testing. It's just they won't talk with us about it. Oh, by the way, I should add, when I mentioned that we spied on Angela Merkel's cell phone, that was we as in we, the United States government. It was not we, Huawei, just to be clear. I still think of the government as we.
Yeah, well, hell, everybody here knows the embassies don't buy Huawei equipment, so I think they got that idea. But what other questions? Because that's really good. We want to do that. And we try to figure it out. But if I create a plan, so we're hoping that it grows out of, because U.S. has plans, right? There are established plans out there. We would love to understand the plan. Tell me what exactly we have to do, because it's the same thing. Tell me what we did wrong. Tell me why, with such a minimal amount of market share in the U.S., thanks to my great sales ability, but that we are the target. There are people out there that believe if you block Huawei, you don't have a cyber problem. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, we have like a minimal market share, right? And you're going to block Huawei, and then all your problems go away, and you can sleep at night. That's crazy. But we would like to do it. Frank?
I don't have any questions, but I'd like to make a couple of comments here. You know, we had a failed deployment by one of the vendors. Quite a few number of years ago. We deployed 3G, and it was a real disaster for Vero. Let me introduce Vero, Frank Dorico, President of Vero Wireless, and we operate in about 4 states around it. And my name's Frank Dorico. We operate about 4 states around here. And we had a false start with another vendor, myself and another company I'm aware of. So we went out looking, and we were very skeptical about Huawei quite a few years ago. And we started with a test system of 40 sites in an area where we were pretty isolated. And these guys came in 3 months, we had 40 sites up and working. And I tell you, we haven't looked back. We've got about 1,000 sites, and you know, I didn't know what to do with my techs because nothing breaks anymore. My biggest problem was generators now, and power supplies, but the stuff is so stable, nothing breaks, everything works. The performance out of this stuff is phenomenal. I'm telling you, I'm in love with these guys. From a network operator, these guys have done an absolute wonderful job for us. And I will tell you, I've deployed probably 8 or 9 systems in my career, from the old Motorola days to I've pretty much done it. I've done it all. And in every deployment I've had a punch list of maybe 200 or 300 items, and there was never less than 50, 60 items on a punch list. And it took months, years to get rid of this punch list. We deployed Huawei. We had, I think it was 4 things on the punch list. 3 of them were 911 because Huawei never did a 911 deployment in this country before. And in 3 days, they came back and they fixed the 3. So, I mean, it was just so freaking painless. I just can't tell you how easy these guys were to work with. And they've been very price conscious. They don't kill us every time you need a software license. And they've really helped my business a lot. I don't think we've recovered, because we were going to be to market with 3G before Verizon and anybody else by 2 or 3 years. And because of this failed system we put in that never worked, we really lost it. And we really never caught up to where we thought we should be, but these guys have done everything they could to help me catch up. So thank you, Huawei.
Thank you for
So if we're giving thanks to Huawei, I think I'm Mike Kilgore, CEO of Neiman, and we have a similar story. About 10 years ago, we were faced with upgrading a 1X network to DO, and we searched for alternatives, and that's where we were introduced to Huawei. So that's 10 years ago. So we still have that same DO network. We have an LTE network that's doing some fixed wireless. We have an IMS core now. We have UMTS. So our little network, if you will, it's well over 100 sites in northeast Montana and northwest North Dakota. We now essentially have a 4G network that benefits not only those that live there, but the 300 million subscribers of the national carriers whose customers travel through these very rural and remote areas. And so without our network, without Huawei's assistance, none of those folks would have the service that they have today. Plain and simple. And oh, by the way, that's roughly 10 years of doing business with Huawei. And we all know that Huawei is only one component of any wireless communication system. If you follow just go unidirectionally, signal arriving at your antenna, at your base station, coming down the transmission line, whatever it may be, however you've deployed your RRUs, etc., into your BBU, into a router, into a transport network, Huawei's only a single component of that system, if you will. Nobody ever wants to talk about the other components that are in that signal path. Many of those components are from American companies, some are from a Chinese company. But it's the whole, it's all things together that make the system work. I think sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we forget, we talk so much about the back door when we don't even realize it's the front doors of our networks that are connected to something called the public internet. We sometimes forget basic network architecture. And we don't always consider all of the vendors that are in place that makes all of this magic work. So 10 years of doing business, multiple technologies, multiple cores, and not a single incident of any security compromise in any way, shape, or form. And believe me, if my customers were vulnerable, I would want to be the first one to know about it so I could then work with my vendors to mediate it and eliminate that risk. And I think Huawei shares that same vision. So, again, I would offer thanks to Huawei too for all of your support.
Thank you, Mike. Another thing to remember is that we are very proactive. The people that are here, especially Joy and Andy Joy's team, if you have situations where a board of directors wants to talk to, we are very flexible. We want to get the word out. Joy and I were chatting, you know, it wasn't culturally Chinese in the early days. When I was, from the moment I've been here, 2003, there's been a few pod shots, but we didn't really say much. The idea was, well, it'll just kind of go away. But once it gets to a point where people start to trash you or damage your brand, then you have to fight back. But even Joy knows now, we're out here, we're proactive, we're transparent, we want to talk to you. If you have ideas that we can help on, we want to help you on those. Andy?
Yeah, let me just add a thought, and thank you as always to comments from Frank and Mike. Friday, Senator Rubio sent a tweet basically saying that I was an unloyal American based on the comments I made in the Washington Post Friday. And, you know, I take offense to that. And the fact is, I believe in globalization. And we spent $11 billion in the U.S. last year buying components out of $108 billion. The benefits that you just heard some of, and the citizens and the organizations that are being served. And the fact is that when we, in some of these various sessions about the benefits of 5G, and you know, the U.S. wants to be a leader in 5G, but it's not about whether it's Huawei equipment or Nokia, Ericsson. That's not what leading in 5G is. It's the enabling technology of 5G. It's going to hopefully help you grow your businesses and help you in the digitization of the vertical industries, to create jobs in this country, to help make this country continue to be a leader in the world. And so, you know, that message that although, you know, we're representing a Chinese company, we're Americans, and we can make sure that America's safe. And frankly, I think our efforts can help make America safer, because we're not safe enough right now.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay.
A little bit harder question to probably answer, but some of the issues would be that Huawei is too secure, that governments don't feel that they can come to you and ask for those backdoors that they may want.
I certainly am not going to answer that question. Prefer not to be visited by the DOJ, but Andy, you could answer that.
Well, I don't think there's any such thing as too secure. The issue of the difficulty, how much more difficult it is for the American intelligence community working with our defense community to be able to gather the national security espionage we need to around the world. And the U.S. is really, really good at that. And I'm sure China's really good at that also. I know of companies that sell zero-day vulnerabilities to the U.S. government so that they can go around the world. I think it's legal, and they can spy and do their surveillance, you know, all around the world. And you've heard the statement that at least 5 countries in the world have the ability to virtually implant hidden functionality in networks and systems around the world. China doesn't need Huawei's permission to hack into anybody's equipment. The U.S. government has the ability to do whatever national espionage, national security espionage that we need to. So I think we're okay, and I don't think there's anything as, you know, being too secure.
Okay, here's a question.
Yeah, so one of the issues that you hear about with Huawei from the U.S. government, if you're honest, is not just the technology, it's the company itself and the lack of transparency historically of, you know, the governance, the financials, the ownership structure. Can you guys say anything today to kind of clear that up, or, you know,
Sure, Joy?
any comments on that?
Joy.
I think Huawei came from a B2B company. In the past, we talked with a lot of the operators most of the time, and we didn't really had a lot of proactive communication with you know, media, government stakeholders, or the general public. I think when we started doing the consumer business, we realized we need to be more proactive when it comes to communication and outreach. So, you know, the company is 100% owned by employees. And the government, the Chinese government, has no ownership or stake in the company, and they do not have any influence on our business operation or future strategy. And we maintain the regular relationship with the Chinese government, just like what we do with any other governments. So I think a lot of the people don't necessarily understand all these facts and truths, and they think Huawei can be manipulated by the Chinese government or is a proxy of the Chinese government, which is complete not true. I think we are being more vocal, more proactive, telling all these facts and truths so that we can change some of the negative perception and correct all this information. And definitely, we're doing more. We're being more open. We just recently, Huawei opened more than 20 R&D labs in China, including Shenzhen, Shanghai, Xi'an, and places in European countries as well. So we're opening up all these facilities so that government stakeholders, customers, or journalists can come in. They can come in to see what the company is all about, what we're doing in terms of future research, and why this company can be successful. And it is not because the Chinese government support. It is not at all. So this is all about, as I mentioned, a company just wants to bring connectivity, bring intelligence to people around the world. And we're just trying to let the story out. Yeah.
Can I just add one
Yeah,
point?
go ahead.
I'm part of Joy's team. To add to what you're talking about, I think there's some cultural differences that early on the company didn't necessarily understand. In China, when someone speaks poorly of you, you don't acknowledge it, you don't breathe life into it, and that's your way of saying, this is ridiculous. In American culture, it's the complete opposite. Someone says something negative about you, and you don't address it, it's almost an admission of guilt. And so for a while, there was that back and forth. But now the company does understand that, and I think this is part of this trust and transparency campaign that you're seeing. We're taking media every month, taking analysts, we're taking scholars to campus, we're opening it. Like Joy mentioned, we're doing media tours all the time. LA Times, they're about to publish a feature on the company. I went with them, took them, something that Joy coordinated. We spent an entire morning where they went through the books of the ownership. They took photos, they randomly called people. How many shares do you have? They learned about the original 5 owners of the company. So those details will be coming out in the future, but we are opening the doors and being more transparent so that there is that trust.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, since '87, we have pretty phenomenal growth. If we were just a mediocre company, but we've done really great. But there's other companies that have done really great. And when we hit the $100 billion mark this year, that was a good thing. But doesn't mean we'll slow down. Doesn't mean we don't expect obstacles, right? Doesn't mean we don't have a growth projection to double that in 5 years. So I would just tell you that we want to obviously engage with the U.S. government because that's where most of all this fodder comes from. But in the meantime, like my focus, even though I kind of help out intermittently with DC, my focus is on you all and the customers. That's my job. My job is to bring in revenues. And the only way I can bring in revenues is to bring to you really cost-effective solutions, and you gotta trust me. And so far, after all these years, we thought we'd be a little farther along, but we do believe we have a lot of customers that trust us, and we know they depend on us. So I would tell you, we are very committed to the U.S., right? We're not going away. That's a question I get, are you going away, right? And sometimes I think they're referring to my age, but they're really referring to Huawei, because we're not going away, right? And I remain steadfast and very committed, as do all the people in the U.S. And you heard from some of our customers, and thank you, and they're very committed to us as well.
So let me add that the model that has worked elsewhere in the world with British Telecom in the UK and TELUS in Canada is where the government's really not interested in talking with us, and that's certainly the case in the United States, but in those countries, those companies went to their governments and said, we want to buy from Huawei. Tell us what we have to do for risk mitigation, and we'll do it. And that's what they did. Do you hear anything about what's going on in Canada? I mean, we have a program in Canada that's acceptable to the Canadian government. U.S. and Canada are among the closest allies, except sometimes the Prime Minister has some issues with President Trump and vice versa. But the program is in effect. They're not pushing them not to be able to use their technologies in Canada. There's proven risk mitigation there. And so since they won't talk to us in the US, there are some of our suppliers, who they don't want to be publicly associated with us, but they're trying to work to get people to listen to us, to talk to us, because it's important to them to be able to sell to us. And so if any customers can talk to the government, can do like the model in the UK and Canada, something can be worked out. We can come up with mechanisms that are going to provide assurance and transparency. And if there's any help we can give to that, we're happy to do it.
I think we're out of time. Maybe time for one more question. One last question. Okay.
I'm just curious about your thoughts on the underlying issue, which is probably about the pay grade of everybody in the room, which is around market access. Historically, market access to China has been difficult for this company, and this is one way of how U.S. policymakers think about. Security is one aspect of it, but other aspect is also market access. Can you comment on how that plays and what is being done? I mean, I know the trade talks are going on, but any thoughts on that? That's great.
Well, that is part of the broader geopolitical context in which we're trying to do business. And as you know, China, although a lot of focus has been on tariffs, China has some issues. The U.S. has some issues about the way China does business in terms of intellectual property, in terms of forced technology transfer, and those are part of those discussions as well. Access to the markets. You've seen all the major associations in the U.S. and globally have basically written to China, and they want a whole lot more access. The question of, is that related to how hard they're pushing back on us? I don't know, but it's part of the geopolitical dynamic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it.